It was just after dawn on August 16, 1942, in the sleepy seaside town of Daly City, California. Locals looked up to see a familiar sight, a U.S. Navy blimp drifting silently overhead. But something was wrong. The massive gray airship, marked L8, was descending fast. Its movements were erratic, jerky, unsteady, like a puppet without a hand. The gondola beneath sagged slightly, its cabin doors wide open, flapping in the wind. Then, without warning, it crashed into the ground, skidding across rooftops before collapsing in the middle of the street. People rushed to the wreckage, expecting chaos. There should have been 2 men on board, LT, Ernest Cody, and Ensign Charles Adams. They had taken off just a few hours earlier on a routine anti-submarine patrol from Treasure Island, part of the Navy's coastal defense during World War II. But when rescuers pried open the cabin, there was no one inside. No bodies, no blood. No signs of a struggle. The controls were still set for flight. The radio was working. Even the crew's parachutes and life vests were untouched. The men had vanished midair. And just like that, the ghost blimp legend was born. What followed was one of the most bizarre investigations in U.S. naval history, one with no suspects, no motives, and no answers. How could trained aviators disappear from a slow-moving, low-altitude blimp without a trace? And why did the Navy seem just as eager to move on as the public was to ask questions? They say history repeats itself, but what about the parts we forgot? Welcome to Echoes of History, the channel where we dig up the dusty corners of the past to uncover the weird, the wild, and the wait, what? Stories they didn't teach you in school. Grab your curiosity and maybe a cup of tea, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. The date, August 16, 1942. The world was at war. Just months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Pacific coast was on edge. Submarines had been spotted dangerously close to the shoreline. In fact, earlier that year, a Japanese sub had shelled an oil refinery just south of Santa Barbara. This wasn't paranoia. It was a real threat. That morning, 2 experienced U.S. Navy officers, Lieutenant Ernest Cody and Ensign Charles Ellis Adams, boarded the L8, a small but sturdy blimp from the Navy's L-class fleet. Their mission, a routine anti-submarine patrol, scanning the waters near San Francisco for enemy activity. Both men were calm, professional, and trained for exactly this type of mission. Cody, age 27, was a skilled pilot with over 1,000 flight hours. Ensign Adams, a naval reservist, was known for his discipline and strong mechanical skills. They lifted off from Treasure Island Naval Base at 6:03 a.m., rising into the cool morning sky. Visibility was good, weather calm, fuel tanks full, radio operational. Everything was going according to plan. By 7:38 a.m., they were in position above the Farallon Islands, scanning for any suspicious vessel activity. At 7:42, they radioed in, "We have a suspicious oil slick. Investigating." Oil slicks were serious in wartime. They often indicated a submarine lurking just below the surface. The base responded, proceed and report findings, and then silence. That was the last confirmed transmission from L8. Back at base, time passed. No updates, no distress calls, no change in signal. But radar still showed the blimp flying its patrol route. At 8:50 a.m., fishermen reported seeing the L8 circling just offshore near Ocean Beach, close to San Francisco. They watched as the blimp descended slightly as if observing something in the water, then rose again. Everything seemed normal, until it didn't. Sometime after 9 a.m., the L8 began to behave strangely. Witnesses saw it rise sharply, drift and land, then lose altitude erratically. By 10:20 a.m., it had crossed over Daly City, striking telephone poles and rooftops before finally crash landing in the middle of a quiet residential street. It had traveled over 15 miles from its last known checking point. It had been in the air for hours. And yet, when Navy personnel rushed to the scene and opened the gondola, nothing. No crew. No emergency gear missing. No damage to the cabin or signs of forced exit. Both men had simply vanished. But how? Could they have fallen out accidentally? Unlikely. The gondola doors had safety latches. Had they jumped into the ocean, but their parachutes and life vests were still there? Was it sabotage, foul play, a mechanical failure? Every theory raised more questions than answers. And the Navy, they wanted answers fast, but they also wanted silence. 2 men, a fully functional airship, perfect weather, a routine mission, and somehow, they vanished. When the Navy launched its investigation into the L8 incident, it quickly became clear no explanation made sense, but that didn't stop people from trying. Let's examine the main theories one by one. Theory 1, mechanical failure or accidental fault. Could the men have fallen out? It sounds simple. Maybe they leaned far over the side during a visual inspection. Maybe the gondola door came unlatched. But there are problems. The gondola doors had locks. They were still secure when found. Both men disappearing at once. Unlikely. If one had fallen, the other would have radioed for help or tried to land. All safety gear was untouched, including parachutes and life preservers. Also, if one man had suffered an accident, why did the airship continue flying for hours in a straight line? That implies either someone was still flying it, or it was placed in auto hover mode before being abandoned. Either way, no distress signal, no trace, and no bodies ever found. Theory 2. Enemy encounter. Could the blimp have come across an enemy submarine? Remember, L8's last radio transmission mentioned a suspicious oil slick, possibly from a sub. Some speculate that the men spotted a Japanese submarine and tried to engage, or were captured by enemy agents. But again, no sign of a struggle. And how would a sub capture 2 men from a blimp without being seen or heard? And consider this, the Navy never confirmed the presence of any hostile vessel in the area that day. There were no explosions, no debris, no distress signals picked up by nearby units. If this was combat, it was the quietest ambush in history. Theory 3. A personal feud or murder-suicide. Rumors swirled. Maybe there was a fight on board. One officer overpowered the other, dumped his body, and then jumped himself. Again, the evidence doesn't hold. Cody and Adams had no history of conflict, no blood, no damage, no open hatches, and again, why no radio contact, even if one snapped? They were trained military officers with clear emergency protocols. Why total silence? Theory 4. Escape or desertion. Another wild theory suggests they planned their own disappearance, jumping into the sea or being picked up by a boat to vanish forever. But let's think it through. No money, no planning, no preparation. They left behind their uniforms, their ID tags, their gear. And why choose a Navy airship as your escape vehicle? The risk was enormous, and they had no motive. Besides, both men had spotless records, no debts, no strange behavior, no reason to run. Theory 5. The paranormal, of course. When all else fails, the supernatural enters. UFOs, interdimensional portals, time slips, alien abduction. These explanations are obviously outlandish, but they gain popularity because nothing else fits. The idea of 2 men disappearing midair, silently, in daylight, without a trace is so absurd that some feel only the absurd can explain it. But here's the thing, the Navy never publicly addressed the weirder theories. They stuck to a single conclusion: the cause of disappearance remains unknown. That's it. No further inquiry, no official follow-up. Case closed, except it wasn't, because people kept asking, writers, conspiracy theorists, amateur sleuths, even retired military officers, all fascinated by this one question. How can 2 men just vanish from the sky? In the days following the L8 incident, the U.S. Navy acted swiftly, but not necessarily to find answers. They retrieved the wrecked blimp, removed it from Daly City, and immediately launched a formal inquiry. A board of officers was assembled. Witnesses were interviewed. Flight logs were reviewed. It looked, on the surface, like a serious investigation. But if you dig deeper, things get murky. No transparency despite national media coverage, headlines about the ghost blimp appearing in papers from coast to coast. The Navy kept tight control over what was said publicly. There were no press conferences, no detailed briefings, and no regular updates. Reporters were given minimal information, and many details were deemed classified. When asked directly about the men's fate, officials gave only one line: the crew's disappearance remains unexplained. That's it. For 2 highly trained servicemen, gone without a trace on American soil, the lack of urgency was unusual. A mysterious inquest. The Navy's official inquiry lasted only a few weeks. By early September, they issued a statement: no evidence of sabotage, no signs of struggle, no mechanical malfunction, cause undetermined. No follow-up investigations were launched. The case was never reopened, and curiously, the families of the missing men reported being told very little. Even more suspicious parts of the report were sealed and not released to the public for decades. Why the silence? Some believe the Navy wanted to avoid embarrassment. Others suggest something was discovered, something inconvenient and quietly buried. Remember, this was wartime. The government was obsessed with morale, secrecy, and controlling the narrative. A story about Navy officers disappearing from a secure patrol mission. That's not good for public confidence. What happened to the blimp? Here's the strange part. The L8 wasn't decommissioned after repairs. The blimp was quietly put back into service. It flew for over a year in the Navy's airship fleet before being retired, and eventually transferred to Goodyear, who used it as a civilian advertising blimp. Yes, you heard that right. The ghost blimp became a floating billboard. No marker, no plaque, no sign that it had once been the scene of one of the Navy's strangest unsolved mysteries. It was as if the incident had never happened. The families left behind. Meanwhile, the families of LT Cody and Ensign Adams were left in limbo. They were awarded presumptive death benefits, but never told what the Navy believed had actually occurred. There was no ceremony, no recognition, no recovery effort beyond the initial days. Both men were listed as missing, presumed dead. Their names eventually faded from public consciousness, and yet, behind the scenes, whispers continued. Some officers allegedly believed more had happened than was. Admitted, a few hinted at the possibility of classified technology testing gone wrong. Others believed the men had encountered something they were never meant to see. But the official record remained unchanged, no cause determined, investigation closed. The impact on naval aviation, while the case was quietly shut, it did have ripple effects. Lighter than air patrols blimps like L-8 were gradually scaled back. After the war, the incident cast a shadow over their perceived safety and effectiveness by the late 1940s. Most military blimps were phased out, replaced by fixed-wing aircraft and radar. But L-8's story lingered, in backrooms and rumors and in the occasional Freedom of Information request decades later. Even after the Navy closed the case, the world didn't. In fact, the mystery only deepened. As the years passed, the legend of the ghost blimp evolved from a footnote in military records to a fascination for conspiracy theorists, amateur sleuths, and even serious historians, because when every official answer ends in a shrug, people start making their own. The Black Ops theory. One of the most persistent tan-chilling theories is that L-8 wasn't just on patrol. Some believe the blimp was being used for a classified operation, possibly testing new surveillance equipment or radar jamming tech. According to this theory, Cody and Adams may have seen or heard something they weren't supposed to, possibly involving other U.S. assets or even a secret weapons test in the Pacific. What happened next? That's where speculation runs wild. Were they disappeared to keep them quiet? Did they stumble into the wrong zone and suffer an unacknowledged accident? Or worse, were they removed in a cover-up? There's no proof of any of this, but there are curious details like how some Navy files about L-8 remained classified into the 1980s, long after any real threat had passed. Why the secrecy, if it was just an accident? The underwater extraction theory others suggest something even more exotic. Remember that oil slick? Some theorists propose that it wasn't just a trace of a passing sub, it was the result of contact. According to this line of thinking, Cody and Adams may have dropped depth charges on what they believed was an enemy submarine, but instead of disabling it, they were somehow captured. The idea seems absurd. How does a submarine capture men from the air? But proponents argue that the Farallon Islands are riddled with undersea caverns and have long been rumored to host experimental naval activity. Could a covert vessel, foreign or domestic, have intercepted the blimp? We have no evidence, and yet, no bodies were ever found, either. The temporal rift theory now, we're venturing into the fringe. Some paranormal investigators, especially in the 1970s and 80s, proposed that the men didn't die or desert, but instead fell victim to a temporal or dimensional anomaly. That's right, a time slip. They point to reports of sky disappearances, missing time, and similar legends involving planes, ships, and yes, blimps across history. Ridiculous, perhaps, but this theory persists for a reason. It matches the facts as well as any other. Two men vanished from a closed cabin, nothing taken, no exit, no remains, just gone. Crowdsourced investigations. In the internet age, new life has been breathed into the ghost blimp mystery. Reddit threads, YouTube deep dives, and online FOIA databases have become digital case files, with thousands of users combing through flight data, Navy logs, and newspaper archives. Some researchers have uncovered strange omissions in early reports. Others claim to have found inconsistencies in witness statements, or timing gaps in the Navy's version of events. Most notably, some digital sleuths discovered that to other blimps in the same squadron were briefly grounded for unknown reasons in the days following L-8's crash, coincidence, or something that never made the official record. The Navy isn't talking. Legacy of silence. To this day, there's no closure. LT, Cody, and Ensign Adams were officially declared dead, but their bodies have never been found. Their names appear on some veteran memorials, but always with an asterisk. A quiet mystery that no one wants to explain in the ghost blimp. Its story lives on in books, forums, podcasts, and late-night theories whispered across decades. Because at its core, it represents something deeply unsettling, even in broad daylight, in a secure country. With every system functioning, people can still vanish. By now, it's clear, the story of the ghost blimp isn't just about two missing men. It's about something deeper, something unfinished. A case with no ending. Most historical mysteries fade with time. New evidence surfaces, theories get debunked. Eventually, we settle on a version of the truth, messy as it may be. But with the L-8, nothing's settled. There were no bodies, no wreckage besides the blimp itself. No radio logs beyond a single routine message. The men weren't taken by storm, war, or enemy fire. They were simply removed from the timeline. That blank space so ordinary, so quiet is what makes the story haunting. It's not the crash, it's the absence, the fear beneath, the mystery. The ghost blimp unsettles us because it violates our most basic assumptions. That trained professionals don't just vanish. That our military protects its own. That reality doesn't skip like a scratch record. But this story whispers something else. That sometimes, even when the world is watching, people can still fall through the cracks. And worse, no one will ever really know why. A legacy of questions. The L8 mystery lingers not because of what we know, but because of what we never will. To this day, the official Navy files remain frustratingly sparse. No follow-ups, no admissions, no closure. And in that void, the mystery has become a cultural mirror. Every generation projects its own fears onto it. In the Cold War era, it was seen as proof of espionage and betrayal. In the conspiracy-rich 1990s, it became a symbol of government cover-ups. Today, it's folded into discussions of surveillance, secrecy, and the fragility of truth. The ghost blimp changes shape, but it never disappears. Memory, myth, and the human need to know what makes a mystery last. Not just the facts, but how it makes us feel. The L8 taps into something primal, a fear of vanishing, of being erased without record, without cause, without anyone noticing until it's too late. And so, we keep asking questions not because we expect an answer, but because not asking feels like letting it happen again. History is full of battlefields and names carved in stone. But sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones that leave no mark at all. Just a quiet street in Daly City, a gray blimp with an empty cabin, and the chilling knowledge that once, on a perfectly normal day, two men took to the skies and never came home. That's it for today's Forgotten Tale. If this story made you raise an eyebrow, or don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that dusty little bell so you never miss another echo from the past. Drop it in the comments. We're always listening for new echoes. Got a weird bit of history you think we should cover? Until next time, keep your curiosity loud and your history weird. That's it.